And thank you for attending, and thank you to my panelists for taking the time today. We're here to talk about preparing for kindergarten admissions. So may I assume that you're all parents? Can I see a show of hands? And you're all here, and you've probably talked to umpteen kindergartens already, and perhaps slightly confused. It's very true that they all do have slightly different requirements for admission, but that's what we're about to delve into today. So may I start by just asking each of our panelists, or certainly for Elizabeth and Sophie, who do represent kindergartens, just briefly, what is the format for the admissions interview?
Basically, for our school, the format is to know from the parents basically what they observe from home, which is a unit of behavior like social skills. Some of them obviously like physiological skills like toileting, as simple as that. It can be very, very simple units of behavior, but it's very important for us to know, to pass the message to the class teachers. Apart from this, the emotional skills also very important.
So are you asking more for the assessment process at the moment, or? Yeah.
Yes,
assessment
we'll start
process,
there. Yeah.
yes. So for German Swiss, for our English stream, we are a selective school, and the parents apply, and then they are invited for a pre-assessment meeting where all the parents get information on how to prepare their children for the assessment, what's happening on the assessment day, and then we invite the families and the children for classroom visits so that the children can see already this is the classroom where I come later, and this is where the assessment will take place. And for the assessment itself, it's always groups of 8 children. One parent can be next door, and then the children spend around 40 to 60 minutes in the classroom and at the playground, and they interact with the teachers.
It sounds so simple, yet why are parents so stressed about it? Are parents stressed about it?
I'll be glad to talk about that. So I'm a clinical psychologist, and I see parents of kids of all different ages. I specialize actually in very early childhood. So I see a lot of parents whose kids are from ages 0 to 5. And of course, a lot of them are considering preschool and kindergarten for their kids. And here in Hong Kong in particular, I've also worked in Shanghai for several years as well, but Hong Kong, even worse than Shanghai, people are highly stressed in general, right? Who here isn't stressed out? Well, I know that just living here can be very stressful. And a lot of times I think as parents, and I know as a professional, that causes us to see everything in life as stressful, not only for ourselves, but also for our children. That we feel that we need, and we believe that we need to prepare our children so well for each experience that they have in life, or else they're not going to make it. They're going to fail. Now, we know that's not true, but that's what we feel often. And so many parents have told me that. And admission to kindergarten is one of those areas that parents really get highly negatively stressed about. And they ask, well, what can I do? What kind of things can I do to help prepare my child? It's very different, as we'll talk today, than, let's say, if you, have taken this college or university entrance exam, or studied for a graduate school exam, which I've done both, where you can really prepare. And they have great preparation courses throughout the world for those. There is no true preparation course for the kindergarten interview.
Yet, parents are enrolling their children on preparation courses.
All the time,
All the
Ruth.
time.
Yes, all the time. Yeah. So what's important, and I'll just run through a few of the major areas that you should be aware of. These are things that parents, in developing their own parenting skills, will do with their kids. And those are the things that are important, I find, in terms of preparing children well for the kindergarten interview. And what I'm talking about is the time of the interview, and again, it's going to vary by school, where the child spends some time with an admissions officer or somebody else from the school, either alone or maybe with other kids, or maybe you're in the room as parents. But they're going to look for, physically, is the child able to walk around by himself or herself fairly well, jump up and down, the kinds of motor skills that one does with their arms and legs that are age appropriate.
Okay, we're going to go into those areas, Andrew.
Okay, so I'm going a little bit too far right now.
Shall we just give the parents some headlines? We're going to talk about several areas. So physical development, language development, social emotional development.
That's right.
Shall we start with physical?
Okay, let's do that.
Shall we ask Sophie? I mean, I think we all understand what that might mean, or maybe you could very briefly. And how do you assess for the physical development?
So for the physical development for our campus in Pockverlam from German Swiss, it's very important because we have a lot of stairs. So the children need to be able to walk up and down the stairs. And this is something we see on the assessment day because we're going to take them down to the playground. And then we can see how they are going to handle the playground equipment, the climbing frame. We have scooters, we have tricycles. So this is basically for us the situation to assess the physical development.
Do children get a lot of practice about walking up and down stairs in Hong Kong?
I think some do,
Right.
and others might not because they are just taken too much care of.
And that's something really simple and practical that parents can do. If their children are not letting their children be free with tricycles or in the playground walking up and down stairs, then they can do that.
We can also help the children by helping them with their fine motor skills, not just the gross motors, like the climbing upstairs. Fine motors, like, say, for example, as simple as picking up the cup, not helped by the assistant teacher to drink. We always say simple observation, but these are quite important. And when the child is on the table, obviously, the teachers and the part of the principal as observant also will look into how they pick up the books, play with the toys, the interest of other things that's on the table or on the play area. Yes, both fine motors and gross motors. All right, so the fine motors is are activities that are using the fingers, the muscles, basically in the to grab things, grasp things, and things like that. We have pre-nursery in Box Hill, and of course, if you see children who has attended pre-nursery, when they go for an interview in K1, you can expect that there's much more training in terms of they can do things. And gross motors, we try to give them some time, like 15 minutes to play around the indoor play area. They go through the slide. Some children are quite shy, but some are very brave. They can use and crawl the tunnel and things like that. So give them some freedom to do their thing, because some children, they need some time to warm up. And that we allow them this freedom to move before we can invite them into the room.
Anything to add on physical development, readiness?
Oh, I would just say that, I think all the points that Sophie and Elizabeth make are very good. And these are things that you naturally, I think, as Ruth was saying earlier, that you'd want to do as parents on a regular basis. For example, helping your child, if your child enjoys Lego, building things with Lego, or with dolls, or playing little games, let's say using little dolls, things that involve, let's say, the fine motor, use of fingers. And then, of course, gross motor, climbing upstairs is extremely important, both in schools and in other places as well. And also, I'd say jumping. I mean, most kids love to jump forward or sometimes even backward, and those are wonderful skills to develop just naturally in the home.
Which I do feel is a little bit less natural in Hong Kong to some extent. So as parents, maybe we have to just seek out those opportunities a little bit more, especially those natural environments like the beach or the countryside.
I agree, yeah. Hong Kong, unfortunately, does not always give us all the opportunities that we might find in some other countries, and we have to create those as parents.
I just want to ask, I'm not sure if it comes under physical development, but toilet training. Can I ask Sophie? I mean, you meet the children. Let's contextualize this. They're entering your kindergarten when they're 2.8 or 3. And
Yes.
how old are they when you meet them?
So for the German stream, they can start with 2.8. For our English stream, it's 3 years. And so when they come for the assessment, some of them might only be 2.5 or 2.8 years old, but they will all be 3 by the time they start. So it's one requirement in our school that the children are toilet trained.
So I heard, and it's not only your school, that they shouldn't be wearing a nappy.
Okay, so I'm not really 100% strict on that, especially in the German stream when we start with 2.8. Some of them are not 100% toilet trained. So what I suggest then is that they use the pull-ups. So this is then the natural movement they would do when they wouldn't wear any nappies or pull-ups. So this is, we support these children. And then we work together with the families and give tips what they can do at home, and so try to enhance the toilet training.
It's very similar for Box Hill. May I add that the children, we try to help them when it comes to washing hands as well, especially with this situation that we have now. We try to give them the steps that eventually becomes natural, so that, again, with the pre-nursery, if the children come to join us pre-nursery, they are off the diaper once they get into K1. But then most, if not oftentimes, those who did not attend pre-nursery are in their nappy. And of course, we accept those children as well, because they just probably didn't have the time to train them at home. But that's pretty much the difference if the child does not attend pre-nursery. But of course, with your help, I'm pretty sure the children can also be ready pretty much during that, before they enter K1.
So Andrew, what are some of the, I can't think of another word, deficiencies that you see in children's physical development at a very young age?
That's a very, very good question, Ruth. I think one of the things is that kids just don't have enough experience in both fine motor, again with the use of fingers, and gross motor skills, mainly using the legs and feet, and sometimes the arms as well. And it's not so much a question of do they have the ability, but they just haven't had the experience. This comes back to the same issue of creating opportunities for your children, both in gross and fine motor skills. And most kids are able to do the things that are expected, I think, of in kindergarten.
I'm just wondering, I mean, most kids, maybe there are some kids, we sometimes see children with what's described as low muscle tone. And
That's
is that a very small minority of children?
That's a very small minority. Oftentimes they have and again, it's not my area of expertise, but what I've learned over many years working with occupational therapists and physiotherapists is that often it's a lack of experience and the use of those muscles that leads to low muscle tone. Not so much that there's something permanently wrong with your child. There may be certain medical conditions that, and I've seen that before, that would lead to that, but that's rare. It's usually from lack of use that we might have low muscle tone.
So physical development, anything to add? I mean, I am curious as to what you do see in children of very young children that are not quite physically developed to what you require in terms of what you expect.
I think what I can suggest to parents is just allow them to do these things. So as long as they are safe, we have to give them the time to develop it themselves. Because sometimes parents, we can't help it. We are overprotective sometimes. And if we just let them do these simple things, of course for us, we see it every day. And you only see your child. We see a lot of children year after year. We can see the differences in children, and that in that way we can help the family that needs help.
And I think what you just said is very important. Help your children to do it themselves. Don't do everything for them. I think that's age-appropriate development. And I mean, we see that sometimes, and I wonder often when they have lunch, and they are not really able to use the spoon themselves because they are still maybe spoon-fed at home. And I think a 3 or 4-year-old is pretty capable of doing it themselves.
I was coming on to that, so I'm not sure if it's physical or social. But again, we have a very unusual situation in Hong Kong where we have domestic helpers, and we wonder sometimes if they do or don't help, certainly in this area.
Yes, I agree, Ruth, that it's an unusual situation we have here in Hong Kong. We depend a lot on domestic helpers, not only obviously for other kinds of tasks around the home, but in raising our children when we're at work or have other things that we need to do during the day. And they become, in a sense, like parents. And this is not an issue that's really been, I think, addressed enough in Hong Kong, but that's a conversation for a different time. What I have, when I'm working with parents, and this is for kids of all ages, particularly young kids who are developing more independence, like around eating, around toileting, while they're in the process of their toilet trained, and anything that would involve that they can do, like pulling up their pants, for example. Helpers, domestic helpers, often want to please their bosses. That means you. And I encourage parents to begin to let go of some of that and to actually, in their position as the employer, actually work with your domestic helper to help your child become more independent. And I've seen quite a bit of success in parents who actually do that and actually instruct their helper, please let my son pull up pants by himself because I've seen him do it. I know he can do it. He's able to do it. And allowing that to happen. And feeding is certainly one of those areas that I've seen kids who are 8 or 9 or 10 years old who are still being fed on a regular basis by the domestic helper. And sometimes they actually, what I was talking about earlier, don't actually ever, well, at some point they do, but at least in their early childhood and maybe even mid-childhood, don't really know how to feed themselves. They have the physical capability. They're able to, but they haven't had the experience of doing so. So I encourage as much as possible, when you know your child can do something and you've seen it done once, allow the domestic helper, tell the domestic helper, please, we want our child to do things for him or herself and become more independent.
Do you have something to add? I mean, this is often under the general umbrella of what we call self-help skills, or I've heard it mentioned before. What else do you see under that general heading of self-help?
I think also that the children need to learn that they also have responsibilities for looking after themselves, or just raise their voice and ask for something instead of giving everything to them. I mean, sometimes you see situations that a child don't even have to say, can I have please a glass of milk or water? They just point and everybody is running around and getting everything for them. So I think this is something which is very important as well, especially then also on the social emotional with other children together. You have to be able to look after yourself and make yourself heard.
Shall we move on to social emotional? And can you explain, Sophie, what exactly does that mean and what are you looking for?
So basically we are looking for that they can able to communicate with other children, that they can develop playing together. I mean, with 3 years old, most of the time at the beginning they start to play next to each other, side by side, not really interactive play, but they also need to learn problem-solving skills. If they have maybe arguments or there's something I want, you have a toy I want, that I don't go and go woof and I just snatch it from you. These are things which are very important, and this also can be started when you go to a playground with your child, if you attend a play group, and try not always to solve things for your child. Let them explore and see what comes from their actions as well.
I think that's a very good summary, Sophie. I would add one more, which is what we call frustration tolerance. So when things don't go right or go the way your child expects, helping your child be able to think, it's okay. It's not the end of the world, as we say. I often talk about Lego situations because lots of kids of both genders love Lego these days. And so sometimes pieces don't fit together the way you want. Or when you're building a small structure, things are just not coming together. And some kids get very upset. Very young kids, I think it's very natural for them, and I think as parents, to be able to teach them to accept that it's okay, and then to do problem solving, to be able to fix or make better what they're upset about. So frustration tolerance, being able to deal with things not going right, is also very important as well.
And that's absolutely normal and natural, and some kids will
right.
get frustrated all the time. I want to ask you a little bit about some more sort of antisocial behaviours that you've observed in young children.
Okay. So that's a very tricky area, antisocial behaviors. Behaviors that violate the expectations of adults, the norms of society or the household or sometimes the school. So kids who don't follow directions, who have trouble controlling their anger. I mean, we all get angry, but we try as best we can, hopefully, to try to control how we express it to other people. So these are kind of some of the areas that we talk about when we think about antisocial behavior. So what can you do as parents? One thing also to be aware of, too, I should say, is that at around age 2 or 3, we have the so-called terrible twos. So we expect kids to define their independence by oftentimes rebelling essentially against authority, against you as parents, sometimes against teachers or other adults. So what can you do as parents? One of the things that is to selectively, first, don't punish too often, because we found through research and experience that too much punishment doesn't work. What does work is praising, which is rewarding through the use of words, rewarding positive behavior. So, for example, if a child, something goes wrong or doesn't go a child's way, and he or she does not become angry and remains calm, is to say something along the lines of, again, everybody has their own words as parents, along the lines of, I love the way you stayed so calm when you couldn't open the car door.
Does that work for husbands?
That works for husbands, and it also works for wives sometimes, too.
We've veered into the area of emotional. Or social emotional, probably hard to separate, right?
That's right. We are social creatures who have emotions, so the two go together.
Right. I want to ask both Elizabeth and Sophie, how can I put this? I mean, obviously you don't accept all children, certainly for German Swiss. In fact, you accept very few children. So what is it that you're looking for that really, is it that your expectations are very high? Are you asking children to do something that's slightly beyond their normal development or what?
No, we don't. What German Swiss is looking for is language. This is the first requirement is a native English speaker level or near native, age appropriate. We don't look at any academics or anything. I mean, we're talking about children who come for the assessment and are 2.5, 2.8, just 3 years old. I mean, what academics can you look for? So they need to be able to speak in sentences, understand, because German Swiss doesn't teach language. The language is English for the instruction, and they need to follow the curriculum. We look for compliance. We look for the physical development, we look for the social and emotional development. These are the main requirements.
Sorry, just a sec. So the 2.5, sometimes you're seeing them, and the complete sentences. Now, if they have multiple languages at home, is that a reasonable expectation that they can speak in full sentences in English?
This is basically what we are looking for.
Right.
So we look for a near native level, and they should be able, if you ask them a question, not just only answer in one word, maybe have 2 or 3 words together. And this is what the parents have been told when they come for the pre-assessment meeting, that you have also try to have English as the main communication language at home, or have situations where English is spoken very often, or the child is exposed to English.
Thank you. We had an hour this morning on this very topic of language, so I don't want to dwell on it, but just to ask Elizabeth the same.
Actually, we of course, we understand that Hong Kong is a multicultural city. So some parents, majority of the parents obviously can speak in English. Box Hill is an English school. But first and foremost, one of the questions that we ask the parents is the relationship between adult child, and child. How do you observe your child when it comes to interacting? For us, it's very important because the teachers, when they first come to school and we admitted them, the teachers should know how to help this child. Of course, language is also very important for us, being an English school, but we looked into the overall development of the child. There's some part that we can help, obviously, but majority of the time, of course, initially it's the social and emotional that we need to understand where the child is, especially during the interview. Some children, they can talk already. Some children can be very shy. So therefore, we give these children a chance. Some children even cry. So if they cry, I advise the parents, don't panic. Obviously, these are natural reactions. So yeah, so therefore, you give yourself a chance. Don't sort of like feel so stressed about it. I think this is what the parents are stressing about. We don't have questions like academic questions. What is your name? The closest that we could do is when the child is not looking, just call her by her name. We will ask the parents, how do you call the child? If the child is so used to being called as Moi Moi, then socially she's called as Moi Moi, then we call her Moi Moi. And then she will look. That's it. Yeah, pretty much. Well, basically in a room, we also give the family the chance to talk to the teachers, talk to the principal, and have the chance to socialize with the new people as well. Because definitely we need to give them some time to adapt to this school setting. The home setting is different, obviously.
Go ahead.
Maybe just one thing about German Swiss, we have the 2 streams within the kindergarten. So the language is essential for the English stream. For the German stream, it's not. And we don't do any assessments for the German stream. So basically, the families meet with me, and we see and we talk, and I tour them around, and then we discuss together if this is the right path, the right curriculum for their child. So German Swiss is a little German stream is different from the English international stream.
Yeah, important clarification.
I'm going to add, this is a very challenging and difficult area. As you can hear, and as we know, that I believe most of the international schools, and this would be true, I guess, of the English track at the German-Swiss school, that they require some fairly good English fluency at the kindergarten level. And I know in many homes in Hong Kong, English is not the first language or even a language that's used at all. So what do you do as parents? Kids can learn multiple languages, but they have to be exposed to good examples of each language. If your English is quite good and English is not the primary language spoken at home, you can integrate that into everyday conversation. What I suggest, and this is based on research by speech and language therapists, mainly in the US, is that if you do integrate both languages, English and another language, don't go back and forth in the same sentence. In fact, even in the same thought, basically the same paragraph, a paragraph is the thought, in the same thought that you're expressing to your child, stick with one language. Don't go back and forth. If your English is not the kind where you feel you're fluent enough, and maybe you want to check with other people, it's probably not best to integrate English into your language at home. But there are many, and I think you probably heard a number when you visited the booths of various schools, that there are playgroups now, quite a few actually in Hong Kong, and some not associated with international schools, where English is spoken. And I don't believe those schools have, or those programs have, English requirements. So your child could actually do quite a bit of English learning prior to actually going for an interview for an international school where English is the language used.
Heavy topic. We covered it this morning. I mean, even what is a home language, what is a native language, it's complicated. I think, we understand for international schools, the children need to present as native English speakers or near native, and that's not necessarily always easy to achieve. So I think we've covered off the language, and we've covered social, emotional, and physical, but I want to come back to what you mentioned, Elizabeth, which is anxiety. And let's be honest, as parents, I remember when my kids were young, we do have a lot of anxiety around that. But if we notice anxiety in the children, and you said sometimes they cry, I mean, quite a lot of the time they cry, right? And that's normal, but how do we help the children to become less anxious, and the parents, throughout the whole process?
If the child cry when they enter the room, or even just enter the school, we allow them some time to settle. Because once they started crying, you can't stop them. And it makes really the parents to become even more anxious to make the child stop. And this is really a very difficult situation. So therefore, we may sort of give them another chance for interview, because definitely a crying child, you can't sort of simply get something out of them. All you can write is the child cry, and it's not really fair on the family in the way we see it. So it's the same thing with some children who are not really talking. There's definitely no language, no social. The child will just fascinated looking at the teacher. Very good eye contact, but just sitting still. So how do we get more out of this kind of child? So basically, we allow them to be themselves. Sometimes when the time is up, we still, of course, without telling them, we still, okay, the child hasn't really talked. But then basically, we will mark them, give them another chance.
Okay. Well, anxiety come across certainly as crying, or it could come across as being socially withdrawn. I'm glad that there are schools that will give children a second chance, because it is natural for many kids to be shy. If, though, you find that your child is, even after a second interview, and more generally is overly shy around, let's say, other relatives who he or she's seen many times, or around kids that he or she has played with on many occasions, then it might be time to seek some professional help from a psychologist like myself or a counselor to better understand whether this is a problem that might be significant. And again, anxiety is one of those areas that people are now recognizing throughout the world that's been under-recognized. And the earlier that we can address any problem, and this is why I specialize in early childhood issues, is that the more easily it's corrected and won't affect a person for the rest of his or her life.
So German Swiss, to avoid maybe anxiety in the children when they come for the assessment, that's why we offer these classroom visits the week before the assessment. And so the children come and they can go to the classroom. There are other children. The parents can come in the classroom with them. And then when it comes to the assessment day, we always urge the parents to tell their children, we're going to go back to the school we've seen last week, and you're going to play with some and make some new friends. And that we also make sure that the parents are next door and the door is open. So a child can always then go back if there is some anxiety about the situation.
That's I was about to ask about separation anxiety, because maybe not as young as 2, but the interview for K1, most of the children are, actually not all of them, but some of them are separated and some of them aren't. But you do it differently. You do it sort of half-half. I'm not sure if that's better or worse. You've obviously got some logic behind that.
Well, we just want to make sure that the child can feel safe about to know my mom or my dad is next door. And if I should feel anxious about something, I just only need to go next door and I'm safe again.
So you obviously think that works better for the children, that they can see their parents but they can't actually physically be with them.
They could, and they have like this guarantee. My parent is not going to leave me alone here, so I can still have a glimpse of my mom or my dad, and they're not just drop me off and they just vanish. So.
Interesting, though, in the United States at least, most programs are drop-off programs. Both my children are adopted, actually. My wife and I adopted them from mainland China when they were both about 1 year old. And about 1.5, they both went to full-time daycare, about 8 to 9 hours a day while we were both working. We just let them go there, and they were both a little bit homesick at first, and then they were fine. And that was true of most of the kids, almost all, who went to that daycare. And I've worked in many daycares in the U.S., and usually it's not been a problem. In some kids, I must say, there has been some issues, but generally it's worked fairly well, where children adapt easily and they become really fascinated with what's going on in the classroom, both the materials that they have and with the teachers and the other kids, and they almost forget about their parents.
So maybe not that you understood me wrongly. This is only for the assessment day. Yes, no. Afterwards, no. They're the parents. We have a mandatory bus policy, so basically they have to say goodbye at the bus already. No. This is only for the assessment day.
Sorry, I misunderstood.
Yeah.
Well, I think for Box Hill, it is how we interview. Basically, we invite the family. The whole family sit together with the teacher or I, if I'm doing the interview, to give natural reaction coming out of the parents as well as that. It helps. I may say that I say children cry, but out of, say, for example, we have interviews of 400 to 600 families. Say 1 cry, 2 cry. I think because they are with their parents.
So you interview one family by one family, so you're not observing the children with one another, or did I misunderstand?
We have the chance for them to be in a big, the indoor play area. There is the group to give them some comfort, seeing other children. They can play at the indoor play area, the slides and whatever is in there. And then another part, we take the family into the room to allow them all these questions answered in their own comfort, so that the social and emotional probably they become more relaxed, I should think. Therefore, that's why crying children, even when in interviews, from the day the children come for interview, we already know how they are. Of course, it's very important to tell the teachers, oh, this one is this one, and then we have extra notes.
So very briefly, I want to cover off, if a child isn't ready developmentally, language, social, emotional, what have you, and there might be some signs that the child would need some additional support in terms of any of those areas. What do you observe in your schools? And Andrew, you could suggest how can parents assist?
Well, again, that's challenging. I think parents can assist by making sure that the child has had enough experiences in his or her life with you as a parent, as we talked earlier, doing challenging kinds of activities, whether it be with gross motor, fine motor skills, whether it be with social interactions, dealing with emotionally frustrating situations involving problem solving. And then also, I think, being part of play groups in which they see other children and other parents are involved, so they become more comfortable in situations that are outside of the home. I think that's a key point here, that experiences that are not part of normal everyday home and family life.
I think it's very difficult if you have the children come in for the assessment, you see them for 40 to 60 minutes. And okay, if they fulfill the language requirements and the other requirements, you never know how the later on development will go ahead. So we at German Swiss, we do have a counselor, also who comes to the kindergarten students, and we also have a support teacher to help in terms of like fine and cross motor skills, cognition, concentration, these things.
I think it's interesting. I have a lot more questions, but we don't have a lot of time. We've covered off those areas, physical development, language, social, emotional, and we've had a very selective school, a very inclusive school, and from a psychologist. So I want to open it up to the floor now, to parents, if you have questions for our panelists. Someone running around with a mic? I'm slightly ahead of time.
Hi, just wanted to touch a bit more on the language part. Apologies if it may have been covered in the morning session. Unfortunately, couldn't attend. So again, our native language is in English, but we do speak English a fair bit and integrate it in our normal speaking with the child. Our dilemma is that if we continue to speak a lot more in English, we're worried that in the future they may not be able to develop the fluency in our native language, which we do want them to have. So we're in a dilemma whether to prioritize speaking in English now over the first couple of years to prepare them better for the interviews, or...
What's your dialect?
It's Tamil.
Tamil.
Yeah. Again, there are different views on this, but the mainstream view within the speech language therapy world that I'm familiar with is that you should do what feels natural. So they would say, based on research, you do what the family typically does. Well, you have, I assume, a young family, and you can define what that is. If you're fluent in 2 languages or even 3, you can speak all 3. It's important to have a native language. So, how do you pronounce it? Tamil?
Yeah.
Is your native
Tamil.
language.
Yeah.
That becomes your child's native language, but doesn't mean that he or she can't also be quite fluent in English. Again, like what I said earlier, that you could use both languages, just don't go back and forth in the same sentence or even the same thought that when you express that to your child. But certainly to develop both languages, but keeping Tamil as the primary family language. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, there's a lot of benefits to that in terms of one's own cultural and ethnic identity.
Yeah, indeed. If my it was just more in terms of the preparation, because the interviews happen by 2 years, and given the expectations of most schools of having quite high fluency in English by that time, a worry was if we don't prioritize English early on, they wouldn't reach that level that's being expected. But again, the flip side is if
I can maybe help out. So you're aiming for an international school where English is the primary language. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And your other half is
also
proficient in English.
Yeah.
So nodding behind you. Honestly, I don't think it's going to be an issue. I mean, for most families in Hong Kong, the challenge is they're juggling with Chinese and English. And I can hear that both parents, you're native speakers. So honestly, I would not worry about that too much. And as Andrew said, your heritage language, your dialect will bring another dimension. And if that's important to you as a family, then by all means retain that. Do we have any other questions? We must have done an excellent job. Okay.
So there's a thank you, and I assure you, we're not the family that just keeps asking questions. So there's sort of one interesting reference, right, which is if you notice certain early signs of either kind of slow development or delays in speech, you should use it as an opportunity to consult either a speech therapist or an OT early on. But equally, there are schools that question, has your child ever been to an OT? Has your child been to a speech therapist? And obviously, as parents, the nervousness is that's going to get used against your child because it's perceived to be a sign that the child's not developing on par with the others. So what's your take on that?
Oh, great question. It's up to you. I'm not a believer that one has to reveal everything. It depends on the school, and it depends on I'll be honest with you, the admissions officer.
But at what age can you detect some speech
Another
delay?
question, yes. Yeah. I think you can detect it at a fairly young age. So, receptive language, what we understand of language, is something that develops first in a child. And that develops as a young infant. If a child's not responding to his or her name, during the first year, during the first 6 months, and the child is not making eye contact, this is more in the social realm too, because social and speech go together, then that would be a concern that by around age 1, and people say it might be later, but around the age of 1, we can really get a sense about a child's ability to understand language, to understand whether there's some social delays that need to be looked at further. It doesn't mean that you necessarily would do a full assessment. You might, but you certainly want to consult with either a speech language therapist or a psychologist, someone who has the training to work with and experience to work with someone with early childhood developmental issues.
It's a really complicated area. I do agree with Andrew. We normally say disclosure is better than discovery, but we're talking about sort of primary age. It's unusual at the younger age.
That's very unusual. Disclosure is usually better. And think about it from this perspective. Would you want to send your child to a school that's not going to be able to meet your child's needs? again, the point being a very young age, Ruth, is a very important one. And I think I would be very cautious. And as kids make huge jumps, as you know, in their development at a very young age. So I would be very hesitant before the age of 1 or even sometimes even 2 to draw any real conclusions.
It's because Box Hill again has pre-nursery, and like you said, even at the age of 1 or 2, when they come, obviously some rather than others, you can notice it already. If the child happened to be, of course, we also have admitted, and that we noticed, and we will have to inform the parents about this. And then we will give them some time, more time to observe at home, suggest to observe at home and at school. We can feed them further. And then if there's anything that is out of the milestone or the skills, then we will rather refer them to professionals. And it helps a lot if you tell the class teacher, because there are things that we don't know, that some children, they behave differently at home and at school, and this is also very important.
All children behave differently at home and at school, don't they? Do we have any other questions? Yeah, a couple more.
Thank you. So in kindergarten interviews, we've talked about a lot of things which the kindergartens would be looking for in terms of skills development and things like that. But what if, you've got a number of children who can do all those things? Then often schools are limited places. What do schools choose based on then? Assuming they are toilet trained, they do make eye contact, they answer the questions, things like that.
I think that's a question for me. I mean, that's the answer is it depends, because every school's a bit different. So you see that some schools are selective and they're really looking for the best. I mean, I think GSIs you're checking off, and you're looking for those children that do meet all of your requirements, and some of them won't. And other schools, they're just looking at all. I often say that there's a very subtle difference between a selective and a non-selective school. Selective school is almost looking at, I can only take some of these children, which children am I going to take, and which ones can I eliminate? And a non-selective school is looking at a room full of children saying, I want to take them all, but I can't, So it's just a slightly different. That's a really complicated question. It's an admissions question. It really depends on every individual school. What we always say is about fit. I can talk to you later, but I don't know if that.
So it's always like if it's a selective school, they might look for, I think you mentioned this before, a child that's beyond their age.
I might have said that. I might not have. I mean, if you're looking at a school like there's a bilingual school, for example, they're going to expect the children to be proficient in 2 languages, whereas if you're looking at a school that obviously GSIS, you only look at for English. So it's just different expectations, different schools, different strokes for different folks. Yeah. I had a question over here.
Yeah, hi. We are actually struggling in between local school and the international school. Child with which character would be more suitable for international school, do you think?
Can we have a better question, please? I mean, I'm going to give this to Elizabeth, because your school, you meet children who go to both different types of school, but don't know if it's...
All right. So actually, that's the unique, I should say, position of Box Hill. Because we are an English school. We have Cantonese and Mandarin supplement, and that we tailor our timetable in order to give opportunity to those families who would like their children to be like proficient in English, as well as do better when they finally chose to go to the local school. We have some parents who have been struggling. Should I go to the international? Should I go to the local? We also have some parents who decided to go to the local, but then a year after, oh, Mrs. King, I have changed school. I went back to the international, and this and that, and vice versa. So basically, at the end of the day, it's still up to the parents. Based on the child's character, sometimes some children, I think they are much more comfortable with their mother tongue, which is the Cantonese. There are also children who are outgoing, and that the parents think that they are more suitable to go to international school. I think it's really very important to know your child.
Did you want to? I have a very definite opinion about one aspect of this. If you have any concerns about your child's social emotional functioning, I'll be very clear. In most cases, choose an international school. The local school system here, and I'm just very open about this, is not prepared to deal with kids with any special needs. And how they do it is not done well. And I won't say too much more about that, but I have many examples.
And maybe one more thing. So if parents choose an international school, so when it comes also for German Swiss, they choose German Swiss because of the academic results when they do their final exams. And some parents might get offered a place at GSIS and they turn it down because then they have another offer from a different international school because they want more Mandarin. So it always comes down to what the family wants at the end for their children.
It's your choice as parents to drive that direction and not to take a cue for, because the international and the local stream, they offer very, very different things. So certainly in the beginning, if you have a neurotypical child that could equally access either one, then it's your choice. Any more questions? We have time for one more, I think. If not, yes. Okay, go ahead. Just shout.
Oh, so languages, right? So the approach that I'm taking with my wife is, I speaking with my wife speaks Mandarin. And we'll try to do that. That's really good advice about not switching in the same sentence. Let's say we're both engaging with the child. Is that very confusing? If she speaks a sentence in Mandarin, I speak a sentence in English, or no, the child?
I would keep it to one complete thought.
Yeah.
Just expand that a little bit. So if you're explaining some instructions, I wouldn't go back and forth. I would continue the instructions till the very end. And then for the next part, next conversation, or the next part of the conversation, then you could switch languages. And then keep that in that same language. That's the only change I would make.
Can I add on something? Because in the German stream, we started with bilingual classes as well. And we have a lot of families where are different languages spoken at home. And what we usually say, each parent should use their native language when they talk to their child. So, if your wife also understands English, so you speak English to your child, your wife speaks Mandarin, and so no one is left out. But the child can then accompany the language to the person, and then yeah.
Okay. Thank you for your questions, and thank you for all of you for listening. Thank you to my panelists, to Sophie and Andrew and Elizabeth. And with that, we'll finish there. Thank you very much.